Hello, this is Dan.
Hi, Daniel. This is Ira Robinson, and I'm with Late Night in the Midlands.
Oh, wow.
Michael Vara had to take tonight off. He's got some really major storm activity going on in his area tonight. So
Oh,
unfortunately,
okay, all right.
he couldn't do it. So he asked me to stand in for him tonight.
Okay, all right.
I was a little concerned. We tried to get a
Do
hold
you
of
want to
you.
move it? Do you want to move it to a different day or something?
Oh,
He's
no, no, no,
available?
no. We're live right now, and we're good to
Oh,
go.
I got you.
So.
Okay.
Yep. Actually, I read the a little brief bio for you off for the listeners, and we can go ahead and get
Okay.
started if you're ready for it.
Sure, great. What's your name now?
My name is Ira.
Ira. Good, great, Ira. Good, I'm right here. Let's do
Okay.
it.
Awesome. Sounds great. Okay. So, like I said, I kind of gave a little bio for you, but if you don't mind, maybe give the listeners a good background info on you so that they know where you're coming
Sure,
from.
sure. I'm happy to do that.
Okay, go for it. We're live.
Oh, good. Right. Terrific. Okay. Yeah, well, my name is Dan Sheehan. I served for 10 years in Washington, D.C. as the General Counsel for the United States Jesuit headquarters, and was co-director of the National Social Ministry Office for the United States Jesuits, which is the policy formulation group. And as you know, the first Jesuit in history ever to be chosen to be Pope is, in fact, Pope Francis, who right now is shaking up the world in considerable degree with his comments about global climate change and the direct role that the economic system of transnational corporate capitalism plays in the contributing to the global climate change. And I was the co-founder of the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review when I was at Harvard Law School. I was a 1970 graduate of Harvard Law School, 67 graduate of Harvard College. Went on to do 2 years of my master's work at Harvard Divinity School in comparative social ethics, and began my PhD degree in social ethics when I was asked to become chief counsel for the Jesuit headquarters. It was there that I ended up being invited to be special counsel to the Congressional Research Service study that was done at the request of President Jimmy Carter when he was elected in November of 1976 to prepare a major report for President Carter on the probabilities of the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence and giving an account of the phenomenon of extraterrestrial vehicles, the UFOs that people had said they had seen. So it was in that context that I first started having my connection in 1977 with this particular issue. And I was later asked by Dr. John Mack, who was the chairman of the Department of Clinical Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, to represent him in front of the Harvard faculty committee that he was called in front of when he wrote his book in 1994 called Abductions, Human Contact with Aliens. And so I've been general counsel to the Disclosure Project that Dr. Stephen Greer sponsored back in 2001. I was general counsel to the Citizens Commission conference that we had a year ago in Washington, D.C. And so I've been involved in making presentations to the International Congress, UFO Congress, and to MUFON and others because of my Harvard Law degree and the fact that I'd represented the New York Times, for example, in the Pentagon Papers case, had actually initiated the case in front of the United States Supreme Court that established the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources. I was chief counsel in the Karen Silkwood case that won the $10.5 million judgment for Karen Silkwood, the woman that was killed at the nuclear facility in Oklahoma. That was portrayed by Meryl Streep in the Academy Award nominated movie Silkwood. I was also chief counsel in the Iran-Contra case that filed a major federal civil complaint against the off-the-shelf enterprise of Oliver North and the Reagan-Bush administration, and was also legal counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union at the Wounded Knee occupation back in 1973. So there's a whole range of things that I've done that have caused people to believe that my analysis and investigation of a lot of the issues relating to extraterrestrial intelligence and some of the attendant issues, like UFOs, etc., is worthy of some listening to.
Well, you definitely come with a big pedigree, that's for sure. A big pedigree and a big background. That's a heck of a litany of different things that you've been involved with.
Yes. Well, I've been fortunate. I've been because of my interest in these issues of the interface between public policy, very important public policy questions, and the law. It's been kind of a special practice that I've developed over the years. You know, I don't do divorce cases, and I don't do child custody cases. I don't do things like that, or car accidents. I do cases that involve major public policy issues and the constitutional issues that are raised. For example, in the attempt to suppress the information of military officers and U.S. government employees and others who obtain information about issues relating to extraterrestrial intelligence, and then are threatened with having their pensions revoked if they reveal this publicly, etc. So I've been asked by a number of people to represent them if in fact they go public with their information and they are later retaliated against, and the threats are carried out against them to revoke their pensions or something. So it's been helpful to have the kind of experience and legal authority that I have to represent people in court. So that's contributed to my being able to have the privilege of being involved in vetting the witnesses. For example, that the 21 witnesses that appeared at the Disclosure Project back in 2001, and more recently in front of the former members of Congress in Washington a couple of years ago.
You mentioned that you were involved with the case that made it so that it's possible for journalists to protect their witnesses. I think that's a big one. I'm very much an advocate for exactly that kind of thing being allowed. I'm a huge that's a huge case, to say the least, and a big precedent that was set.
That was, yeah.
In regards to that, I guess, what do you think of the things that are happening lately, where it seems like whistleblowers and witnesses and that type of thing are being targeted by the government entities?
Well, sure, no, that's what they do. It's an old CIA agent once told me a famous story that they tell in the agency of this little Russian woman that lived way out on the steppes, and in the depths of winter, it was like 20 degrees below zero, and she went out of her house to try to get some wood that had been cut outside, and she found the snake that was frozen solid out there by the wood pile, and she brought the snake in and put it down in front of the fireplace, and as the heat built up and the little snake thawed out, she reached down and stroked the snake, and the snake bit her in the hand. And she was freaked out, and she looked at the snake, and she said, "Oh, that was terrible. I brought you in here from the cold. You were freezing, and I put you in front of the fire, and and here you just reach out and bite me." And the snake looked up at her and said, "Well, gee, lady, that's what snakes do."
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I've heard
the thing is, well, the thing is that that you put people in charge of a set of secret programs. Starting with the National Security Act of 1947, you create the Central Intelligence Agency and the National Security Council, and you put in front of them this assertion that the Soviet Union is attempting to take over the whole world, and we have to stop them because basically, as George Carlin says, that's our job. So they end up in this dialectical confrontation with Russia. and they constantly rationalize, deep secrets and covert operations and political assassinations and other things. And so they become very aggressive in attempting to conceal that type of activity, not so much from the Soviet Union or other potential adversaries, because they all know we're doing this, but they're trying to keep it concealed from the American people, because they're trying to convince the American people that we're engaged constantly in defending democracy and trying to promote human rights around the world, whereas in fact it's quite clear that that's not what we're engaged in. So that goes a great distance in explaining why it is that when, in July of 1947, when the vehicles crashed at Roswell, when the United States military took those UFOs into possession and insisted upon trying to figure out what the technology was, when they're faced with such an extraordinary event of that kind, there's the old Sufi saying that, when a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are his pockets. And in this particular instance, they actually encounter extraterrestrial life forms and vehicles, and all they can think of is trying to seize the technology and figure out how to make weapons out of it, and how we can secure some sort of a competitive advantage over the Soviet Union, whom they branded as the ultimate other. And so that they keep this secret all the way from 1947 all the way up to 1992, basically December 31st of 1991, when the Soviet Union dissolves. But by that time, they built up such a momentum of deception and lies and deceit that they can't quite figure out how to get their way out of this thing now. And so that's the situation they find themselves in. So they've developed this entire tactic of suppressing news media people who investigate things that they're doing, are trying to attack people who are whistleblowers, anybody who threatens the kind of veil of secrecy that the national security state has arisen behind, and so that they go after fellows like Snowden and others who are whistleblowers. But we represented the New York Times back in 1971 when we were put into possession of all 47 volumes of the highly classified Pentagon Papers case that the Neil Sheehan, one of our investigative reporters, got from Dan Ellsberg. But we protected him all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, and ended up winning that case. And so we're able to fend off some of these aggressive positions that are taken by the executive branch. But as the founders of the Constitution said when they told you have to be eternally vigilant, because the executive branch views themselves as being basically the progeny of the king. And so they all think that they have the right to engage in all types of activities that exonerate them from having to obey the rest of the laws that everybody obeys. And sometimes it breaks out into the public, as it did with the Nixon administration. Back in 1972, the Watergate burglary. I happened to have been fortunate. I was one of the three trial lawyers in F. Lee Bailey's office when our office represented James McCord, the Watergate burglar, who was the longtime CIA wiretapping specialist. And he's the guy that ended up blowing the whistle on Richard Nixon in revealing the plumbers unit and Nixon's deep involvement in the Watergate thing that led to his impeachment. So I've been around these things for a long time, and I think that one of the most important issues that is being concealed by the national security state, and which they protect by retaliating against news media people or anybody who has access to this information, is this issue of the existence of an extraterrestrial civilization and the UFO sightings that now literally thousands of people have seen, and many of whom have been openly attacked by United States military personnel, intelligence community people trying to destroy their credibility. We've now obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, internal memos that have been prepared in the Air Force and the other Pentagon offices explicitly advocating that secret attacks be directed against anyone who attempts to reveal to the public the existence of these UFOs and what their connection is to an extraterrestrial civilization. But, that we just keep after this thing and working at it and trying to get the various institutions to change their positions on this. And we have succeeded now, finally, in getting the Jesuit order. A lot of the guys that are in the largest single order of the Catholic Church, which is the largest denomination in the world, to move forward now. And we've gotten, Father Fuentes, Jose Fuentes, who is the Jesuit priest, who is the director of the Vatican Observatory, is the fellow who, and the head of the Peace and Justice group. These are people who brought together world scientists at Castel Gandolfo back in 2009, October 2009, and brought in a whole series of some 30 plus world scientists to have discussions with the hierarchy of the Catholic Church about the growing evidence that is obviously coming to the fore, that is now revealing that for the first time they are certain now that there are other planets around other stars. We now know that with the Kepler telescope that's been now put up after the Hubble, that is much more powerful than Hubble, is able now to expand knowledge that rather than simple 100 billion star systems that they at one time thought were in our Milky Way, they now have increased that to 400 billion star systems, and now they're likely to expand it more to 500 billion star systems in just our Milky Way galaxy.
And there's multitudes.
They figure 20% of them have multiple planet systems around them, and of those, a full quarter of those have planets in the so-called Goldilocks realm, not too far from the sun and not too close to the sun to have adequate heat for liquid water, so that they've now estimated there are probably some 40 billion planets just in our galaxy, of the Milky Way galaxy, that may possibly sustain life. So with the onset of this new information coming to the people, the Catholic Church and the Jesuit order have stepped forward and convened a major press conference in Rome at the Vatican back in October of 2009, and specifically stated that they believe, based on the developing science, that it's very likely in the comparatively near future, sooner than later, we're going to encounter life in outer space, and they're going to find it on other planets, and that I believe that they're going to be using this set of discoveries to feather in to our culture. The discovery of microscopic life on other planets. Then they're going to discover kind of basic single cell life, and then they're going to find multiple cell life, and then they're going to find simple life forms of bacteria and plants, and they're going to eventually discover, a complex, highly intelligent, and a highly technologically developed civilization of sentient, intelligent beings that are specifically not human. And Father Fuentes and the others back in October of 2009 called on the laity of the world to start having important discussions about what the profound philosophical and theological implications are going to be of our human species discovering that we're not, in fact, not only not the center of the physical universe, as it was one time maintained, which gave us our sense of great self-importance, but when that was proven to be not true, there was a traumatic experience that our human family went through of trying to recalibrate how it is that we could possibly, still be the most important beings in the universe. And so what we did is we replaced this theory of concentric circles with us at the center of the whole universe with a pyramid placing ourselves at the top of the pyramid of a biological evolution. Now, even that is likely to be challenged. We're very likely to find that, given the fact that there are 500 billion star systems in our galaxy with some 40 billion planets that may well hold life, and in addition to the 500 billion star systems there are in our galaxy, there are now estimated to be 500 billion trillion galaxies. So it's not likely that we're alone.
Absolutely. Well,
in the universe.
We know from like, for example, Hubble. One of the most dramatic images I've ever seen is the image where Hubble, they pointed it to a blank spot in the sky, this little itty bitty 1% piece of the sky, and just left it on. And they thought that it was just a dead area of space, that there was nothing that was there. But by the time the images came back and they were able to develop everything, they saw that there were hundreds and hundreds of fully formed galaxies there, just waiting to be examined. It's amazing to me.
People can look this other section of the Hubble big movie that they released on that is that you look at the Orion's belt, the one that's fairly easy to pick out with that series of stars forming the belt, and there's the so-called sword hanging down. If you look at the star at the very, very bottom tip of the sword of Orion's belt, they focused on that, and they were able to basically, through computerization, pull down the minimal amounts of light and focus it through Hubble. And there's this scene in Hubble in the big IMAX movie where they are able to kind of take us up into outer space and look over the edge down into this. It turns out to be a major cauldron of producing stars, just billions of stars being pushed out from this nebulae. And that's what that is, actually. That little tiny vague light that you see at the very bottom tip of Orion's sword is a nebulae gushing forth stars by the tens of thousands. And it's just one of the most astonishing, overwhelming experiences.
It is.
To realize the scale that we're involved in.
It is, absolutely. Whenever I see that kind of an image, man, it brings tears to my eyes. It really does. I don't mean to be dramatic, but that really is exactly my reaction to it. Just the thought that, oh my God, such an amazing abundance of things that are out there. And here we are arguing over whether or not people have rights. It's just, it drives me crazy.
It keeps you in perspective. I mean,
the
going out on a night like, tonight, in the midst of July, here in the middle of the season of the summer, you go out under the summer sky and you look up into the sky and you see the tens of thousands of star systems, and you turn and focus upon one particular star and see it pulsing there. And you get into a perspective of saying, look, how silly is it for us to be drawing lines in the sand and saying, if some people come across that line into my territory, I'm going to participate in digging up minerals out of the ground and melting them and turning them into lead and gunpowder and shooting you and killing you for coming across this line. I mean, it's so absurd. The real challenge is trying to figure out how to get ourselves relocated in a way where anything is of any pertinence and value at all, having to do with our human family. And that's why, in addition to asking just the profound philosophical questions about our place in the universe, we have to begin to ask these questions of theological questions. As what is it that exists out beyond the physical limitations of all of the sum total of mass and energy that makes up the universe? How did the universe come into existence, and how does consciousness arise in the midst of this apparently inanimate material universe? How does consciousness come into existence, and is it more than just a minimal epiphenomenon of the interplay between mass and energy? Did consciousness pre-exist the universe? Is there an infinite and eternal sea of absolutely undifferentiated consciousness that abides out beyond the universe? And is this sentient? Is this somehow involved in intentionally enfolding into being the material universe so that there's some purpose to this whole thing? These are all profoundly important questions, and they are raised immediately when one encounters a being from an extraterrestrial civilization. All of a sudden, the people are just cellularly stunned. I mean, our entire cellular system is shocked at the immediate experience of encountering another being that is an immediate revelation of the existence of dimensions of reality that we have not even comprehended. And so that's the kind of experience that people encounter when they actually see a genuine UFO. And they're not just a light in the sky or even a light that zigs and zags in a particular way, but, a full-scale UFO sitting on the ground, that a person can walk right up to and put their hand on it, as a friend of mine did one time, and they just, it is a genuinely theological experience that people are having. And that's why it's now open on to these discussions that are going on inside the Jesuit Order, the Society of Jesus. There are dialogues going on now with the leaders of other major world religions about this. And so that it's inevitable that we come back full circle, back to the kind of discussions that George Adamski and others were having back in the 1940s, about what the full-scale philosophical and theological implications are of our encounter with these UFOs and extraterrestrial beings. So I'm delighted and privileged to get to participate in this type of a discussion, as all the folks that are listening are. That's why you're listening to shows like this, because these are extremely exciting issues for us as human beings.
It's why I do these kind of shows myself. I'm very much attuned to the idea of trying to shift consciousness in one way, shape, or form, because we have to get away from this baseline thing that we're doing now. In this world, it's obviously not working. It's going to take a shift in consciousness to get us to get away from what you were discussing there, of getting the territorial type of mindset. This is mine, this is yours, and I'm going to take what's yours, right, and on and on and on. Right. It's a big consciousness effort that has to be done. You have to really change your mindset all the way to have an understanding that there is something else that's out there that's interacting with us right now, and the fact that we don't really even understand what consciousness is at this point. They don't even know, are unable to explain where it comes from, where it's centered, all of this kind of stuff. They claim that they do, but they really have no depths of understanding at all.
No, but it's something that if we can get our regular people, such as we are, feeling empowered to actually begin to have these kind of conversations, rather than come home and turn on your television and watch some mindless game where people are bouncing a basketball up and down the floor with a blue team and a red team, or batting a ball with a stick, and people cheering, or a piece of pigskin, trying to run over the top of each other. To actually sit down and turn the television off and have some intelligent discussions about some of the implications of what's going on. This is what Pope Francis is now calling people to do, saying, look, we've encountered a situation where the spewing of the global greenhouse gas emissions up into our atmosphere is now reached such a drastic point that it's actually negatively impacting the entire climate of our planet. And so we need to confront not only the narrow environmental questions, but the more profound philosophical questions. Is what is the worldview that is causing us to be so insecure that we think that our only source of value is in gaining more and more access to more and more material goods, and being entertained and titillated by shows on television that have to do with people punching each other until they're unconscious, or running over each other with footballs, or shooting and killing and maiming on police shows, all the time. We've got to get out of that and transcend that type of intense, low consciousness type of entertainment, and reflect upon the higher values in life, and that's what Francis is calling people to do now. He pointed out that the rampant consumerism of people pursuing just more and more material goods is being driven by an economic system on our planet, which is rooted in greed and avarice on behalf of the top 1% of the people in the world. They're making money at running these major corporations, and they're brainwashing us into believing that there is nothing of great profound value other than how much you can possess, so that they can create more markets for selling more and more products, which in turn require them to extract more and more natural resources from the planet and put them through these factories and spew out all of these carbon emissions and poisoning our planet here. That we've got to step back from this and look at what this underlying worldview is that no longer believes that there are any fundamental source of values. And these are the issues we're going to have to come to grips with in order to become clear about what we believe as a human family, because we're getting set to encounter other extraterrestrial civilizations. And so we've got to get ourselves prepared here, I think, to merit a position at the table with these other beings, where we can explain why it is we do the things we do, how it is we can explain how we're going to get over this and stop ruining our planet and killing and maiming each other. We have to come to grips with these things now, and it may be that it requires something shocking and marvelous and astounding, like what's happening with the UFO phenomenon now, in order to shake us out of our more narrow view of things and start to think more cosmically.
Earlier this evening, I did a news story towards the beginning of the show about how MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, has increased or reported an increase in UFO sightings over the past month compared to last year. They had over 1,100 sightings, which is 600 more than what they had last year. Now, they said that it might just be because people are more aware of MUFON at this point, and so they're more apt to report. But still, I think that's significant that there's that many different reports worldwide of UFO activity each month. That's a lot of activity that's happening in the skies.
No, I know. But I'm hoping that we can get some kind of influence on these television shows and these movies. The dark skies and falling skies and, and alien eating you, and, all these terrible movies and television shows that have just terrible cosmic politics.
Yeah, I agree with you completely with that.
Every other extraterrestrial civilization is some horrible threat. They're going to try to invade our world and kill us or something.
Yeah.
We've got to try to get over that and consciously develop media and films and television programs that present the extraordinary opportunity that this really represents for our human family to expand our consciousness and our horizons.
I have lamented many times about the fact that science fiction movies, for instance, have taken a big turn towards, instead of being very thoughtful shows or thoughtful movies, things that'll make you think or maybe make you have a brighter view on the future or something like that. They've now become horror movies that are just tied to science fiction kind of setting, and it annoys the crap out of me. It really does. I'm a big science fiction fan.
Bad cosmic politics.
Yeah.
Bad cosmic politics. But we can't just wait for other people to do something about this. That's one of the things that Pope Francis is talking about. He issued a big prior to his latest papal encyclical that he issued here on June 18th. He actually had a papal exhortation, they call it, or admonition, called Evangelii Gaudium, that he issued back in February of 2013 when he first became Pope, saying, look, we can't sit around waiting for other people to solve these problems, because then the major corporations then take advantage of us because they've got more money to spend on indoctrinating us and telling us that we have to listen to what they're proposing. But what we've got to do is we've got to do something similar to the old Chautauqua movement that happened back during the robber baron era. From 1868, at the end of the American Civil War, up into 1898, just that little 30-year period, there was the development of this concept of the corporation, where as a new business model, where the people who actually owned the companies didn't have any legal responsibility whatsoever for whatever the companies were doing. They just all owned a share of the profits, but they didn't have any role in actually governing the conduct of the corporation. It was run by a set of managers who also were immunized against any legal liability for whatever the company did, and just the assets of that particular business entity were all that were subject to lawsuit. And what happened during that 30-year period, the rising of the robber barons, of the major industrialists, the steel mills of the Carnegies, the railroads of E.H. Harriman and those folks, the big, huge investment companies, Brown Brothers Harriman and J.P. Morgan Guarantee Trust, the big financial barons. The American people, when we were confronted by this, and we saw the huge industrialization and the ruining of our cities and child labor, kids that are 7 years old, working 12, 14 hours a day in the mines because they're small and they can get into small places. What we did is we rose up, and the Chautauqua movement that was actually initiated by the National Board of Homeland Ministries and the National Methodist Church, actually set up training sessions for regular people to come to talk about these issues, and they ended up generating the American labor movement, the American suffrage movement that generated the right for women to vote. They generated the initial environmental movement. They generated the anti-child labor laws. All of these, they generated the civil rights movement, the post-Civil War civil rights movement. That all of these things came out of the Chautauqua movement that was explicitly generated to try to stimulate conversations among our people about these things, because the robber barons and these big industrialists had taken over controlling the Congress of the United States through bribing them. And now they've legalized the bribing, by the Reagan and Bush administrations and the Nixon administration and the Ford administration, putting into place in the judicial branch, a whole bunch of these corporate lawyers from the Federal Society, and they're all in there now, and they've now actually gotten on the Supreme Court. There's 4 of them on the Supreme Court now, and they've actually set forth opinions saying that corporations are people.
Yes, I was going to bring that up.
Citizens United case.
I was going to bring that up. Yep.
This is ridiculous. Now they're authorized under their First Amendment rights to contribute as much money as they please to the election of these congressmen and senators. And to no one's surprise, the congressmen and senators are doing just exactly what the corporations want them to do now.
You're absolutely right.
We've got to rekindle a movement similar to the Chautauqua movement to mobilize people to come together in real life. Use the technology that we have of the computers and conferencing and stuff like that. But we need to get people together face to face and meet with each other and mobilize and develop an alternative set of policies, which I think is going to require the development of an alternative political party, to this Republican and Democratic Party. Now, the Republican Party has become completely reactionary now. And you see these people like Donald Trump and Ted Cruz and all these people competing with each other to see who can be the most reactionary, the most kind of hateful and nasty and pandering to the major corporations and denying the existence of global climate change. And so the Democratic Party, as the Republican Party, moves from being just a simple conservative party to being a completely reactionary party. The Democratic Party moves from being a liberal party to a moderate party, and now is starting to take up a conservative position with Hillary Clinton. So that this is something that we've got to respond to. I know that Bernie Sanders is advocating a set of very progressive positions inside the Democratic Party, but the leadership of the Democratic Party is controlled by the major corporations and banks. So it's not likely they're going to really cooperate much with Bernie Sanders having any realistic chance of winning the Democratic Party nomination. So we have to realize that the Republican Party is going to try to respond to say, well, look, these reactionaries that are campaigning for the Republican nomination, let's all breathe a sigh of relief and give it to someone like Jeb Bush instead. So, you're going to have Jeb Bush being the nominee for the Republican Party and Hillary Clinton being the nominee for the Democratic Party. And they're going to expect all of us to rush out and vote for Hillary Clinton just because she's a woman. Even though she has supported these very, very conservative policies of, drone killings of people, American citizens. They supported the National Defense Authorization Act, which now for the first time authorizes the United States military right here in the United States to swoop into any county in the country and arrest an American citizen without any probable cause to believe that we've committed a crime, incarcerate us in a military stockade with no right to an attorney, incarcerate us indefinitely with no right to habeas corpus, no right to be brought in front of a judge, to have a judge demand that the executive branch prove that there's probable cause to believe that we've committed some kind of a crime. They're allowed to do this simply on the finding of some nameless bureaucrat in the Justice Department that they have a reasonably articulable suspicion that this American citizen is somehow given substantial assistance, whatever that means, to any person who is affiliated in any way with any organization that this bureaucrat inside the government has determined has expressed hostilities toward the United States or any of our allies. This is getting to be almost insane, to stand by and allow something like this to happen. We've got to mobilize. And so we've advocated here in Santa Cruz that we're going to be passing an ordinance in our city council declaring the city of Santa Cruz, California, to be a constitutional protection zone, where we're not going to allow any U.S. military people or federal officials to come into our county and arrest anybody under that provision. That we're going to insist that if anybody is going to be targeted for such an apprehension, that they have an absolute right to all the due process that the Constitution guarantees them, and that we will take steps to get that done. So we've got to be active. We've got to be active. We can't sit back and wring our hands and wait for somebody else to solve all these problems, Ira. We've got, like you're doing, you have the radio show where you get people to come and listen to the show and think intelligently about these profound questions. And we've got to use these resources that we all have to gather together. People can contact us here at the Romero Institute in Santa Cruz. You can contact us, and you can contact us on I go on the internet now, just under Romero Institute. We have a face page, and you can check on RomeroInstitute.com. We've got a major project where we're representing all 9 tribes of the Great Sioux Nation up in South Dakota. So there's a Lakota People's Law Project.com. But just check with us on the Romero Institute. That our institute is named after Bishop Oscar Romero, the Archbishop in El Salvador that was murdered by the death squad down there, simply because he stood up and advocated that people, form farmer cooperatives to cooperate together in developing their land so that the big oligarchs wouldn't take them over so they can grow sugar beets or coffee for, the American commercial market. So this is the kind of thing we need to do. We need to organize. I think we need to have a new political party, a progressive party. I think that we need to have a Chautauqua movement for our citizens gathering together. And one of the major issues that we can be addressing is asking these questions, these profound philosophical and theological questions about what the import is of discovering that there is, in fact, another extraterrestrial civilization, in starting to prepare us to participate in it as fully entitled to be proud of our human family, because we've been able to overcome some of these lower angels of our nature.
I cannot say that I disagree with anything that you've said so far. It's definitely been great. Let's go ahead and take a break here real quick, give you a chance to rest your voice a little bit. And when we come back from the break, I have some questions that have come in from the chat room for you.
Sure.
And we'll also take
Sure.
any calls that anybody wants to call in. You can call into 260-494-3937. That's 260-494-EYES. And be sure that when you call in, you have your side muted so that it doesn't interfere with the conversation that's going on at that moment. Daniel, hang on. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Everybody else, we will be right back.
He's not only going to be addressing the General Assembly on the 25th of September, but on the 24th of September, the day before, he's going to be addressing a joint session of the United States Congress. Both of those are the first time ever in the history of the United States or the UN that a pope has actually addressed them. And all of this is in direct connection with the fact that in November, from November 28th to December 11th, there's going to be a major summit meeting of the heads of the nations in Paris to try to determine whether or not the nations are going to finally impose mandatory and legally enforceable restrictions on the major corporations to prohibit them from pumping the global greenhouse gas emissions out into the atmosphere. That this is what the Pope is going to be talking about. As I say, he's talking about not just the profound and serious problem of global climate change, but the underlying economic system that is actually rooted in greed and avarice and open-ended exploitation of the resources for personal profit of a tiny percentage of the people that own these corporations. And all of this is a subset of a worldview, the postmodern worldview that has denied the existence of any type of real moral absolutes, that there are any kind of fundamental rights that people have that are real in any way, and so that everything is just thrown up to just aimless competition. And so that he's going to be addressing these issues both before the United Nations General Assembly on the 25th of September and the joint session of Congress on the 24th of September. And he has scheduled a major international press release for December 8th, which is right toward the very end of the meeting that's going to be taking place, the summit meeting in Paris from November 28th to December 11th. And if, in fact, the nation states do not finally live up to their promise that they made 21 years ago, that they would, by the end of 2015, have an in-place mandatory set of restrictions on the global greenhouse gas emissions by corporations in each of the nation states. If they fail to comply with their promise, Pope Francis has reserved that time on December 8th to issue a major global statement on international television and internet throughout the world, declaring a Jubilee year in which he will call for the elimination of all debt on the planet, to cancel all the debts to the banks and to the International Monetary Fund and to all the big corporations, thereby, basically pulling the rug out from under the major international banking system that is rooted in debt, in this fractional banking that authorizes banks to lend out 10 times the money that they actually have in the bank and generate all of this false debt on the part of people. That the Pope has made it clear that he's prepared to do this if, in fact, the nation states renege on their promise to impose these mandatory and legally enforceable restrictions on their corporations. So that there's a major set of events that are going to be taking place here. We have called upon Francis, when he appears in front of the joint session of Congress on the 24th of September, to revoke the doctrine of discovery, which was the 1493 papal bull that was issued by Pope Alexander VI at that time, declaring that it was authorized by the church for the Christian nations, such as Spain and Portugal and others, to basically seize the lands of Aboriginal people who were non-Christian and unbaptized people, and to seize their land and exploit their resources, to take their gold and silver and the minerals of their traditional homelands and actually enslave the native people. And so that he has already apologized in Brazil last week for the grave sins on the part of the Catholic Church in the past, having participated in the systems of slavery and territorial exploitation and imperialism on the part of Spain and Portugal and the other Catholic countries. And so that there's absolutely revolutionary positions that are being taken by Francis now in the face of the major threat that is posed by global climate change.
Are you surprised? Are you surprised that he's actually still alive, given all the things that he's done and said? I mean, well, I'm actually kind of surprised about it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. As Father William Davis used to say, who was my superior at the Jesuit headquarters, he says, "Look, Danny, nobody gets out of life alive." You know, so there's only you have 100-year period in which you get a chance to do something. And if in the course of doing the things that you know to be morally required of you, others decide that they're going to try to terminate your life, that you hope that something like that won't happen. But, if in fact people attempt to do something like that, it'll just attract that much more attention to what it is that he was trying to tell people.
It just validates the point.
Someone else will take his place, and he's already, we already have a pretty good idea who the other pope will be, who will take his place if anybody tries to do anything to him. And if they think they're having trouble with Pope Francis, wait till they get a load of Sean O'Malley. Sean O'Malley was the guy who was number 2 to him in the voting in the conclave, and Sean O'Malley is an absolute saint. I mean, an absolute total saint, and he will have absolutely no compunction whatsoever in carrying out not only what Francis was trying to do, but probably try to double what it is that he's trying to do.
Well, I'm not Catholic.
That way.
I'm not Catholic myself. I'm not, religious. I used to be Christian, but I'm not religious at this point. I, consider myself spiritual and that sort of thing. But I have to say, regardless, I like this guy. That is one thing that I will have no compunctions in saying. I like what he's doing, and if he's doing it in valid ways, if there's no subtext to it or anything like that, like sometimes happens with people. Regardless, I definitely like what he's come out and said and done so far, and I think that he has gone far to try to change the face of the Catholic Church overall. I really do think so.
Yeah, he and Sean O'Malley, who's his right-hand man, have come in and replaced. They're the ones that were responsible for getting rid of Benedict. Karl Ratzinger, who was Pope Benedict XVI. They got him fired. For only the second time in history that there's been the resignation of the Pope like that, and they got rid of him because he was covering up all of the bank scandal. He was covering up the pedophile priests, and it was threatening the continued viability of the entire Catholic community. And so they get rid of him, and they've relegated him to a nunnery, basically. He can't even leave the grounds of the Vatican. He's basically under guard there. And they have stepped forward and said, look, enough is enough. And that they've called for a major, this is nothing less than a revolution across the world that he's calling for. He has condemned the debt-based financial system of state capitalism and the entire economic theory of transnational corporate capitalism. He's actually referred to it as the dung of the devil. That was the term.
Yeah, I remember hearing that actually. Yeah. I find it interesting. I mean, if he does end up declaring a Jubilee year, that's going to be a major thing that occurs.
Oh yeah. No. It would cancel all of the national debts of the major countries that have been owed by the International Monetary Fund. The International Monetary Fund, the United States, at the end of World War II, basically set up the United Nations in that they had 5 permanent members of the National Security Council, every single one of which was in fact Caucasian, and excluded China, the biggest country on the planet. They excluded them, had them represented by the nationalist Chinese of Chiang Kai-shek, on Formosa, ridiculous. And established the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank so that capitalism was the only viable mechanism of international development and resource development and distribution. And so that there are major flaws with the United Nations structure that need radical reforming. And so that the entire system, the economic system of transnational corporate capitalism has run its day. And he is calling for a radical replacement of transnational corporate capitalism, a new, completely different alternative economic model. So those are also things that we have to be discussing in this new Chautauqua movement. The Chautauqua movement, as I mentioned earlier, it was set up by the National Board of Homeland Ministry originally just to train people who were going to be Methodist Sunday school teachers. But they've eventually opened it up to all of the high school civics, social studies teachers in the country, and began teaching, what had to be done to get rid of these robber barons. And as I say, it generated all of these different major social movements in the country. We need to have another burst of energy like that on the part of our people that gather together and come together and sing and dance and have discussions and read books and organize ourselves, pull ourselves away from this mindless television stuff and actually, talk with each other and discuss what's going on. It's undermining the solidarity of the families. The people come home and the parents plop down in front of the television set and the kids, wander off and, with their telephones and go to the mall, and the basic structure and substance of our families are being fundamentally undermined by these type of things, which are just sticking you there because the corporations want to advertise mainly the pharmaceutical, all evening long on the television. And they stimulate people by having murder shows, of police shooting and killing each other with automatic weapons. And we need to get a grip on what's happening here. And what Francis is saying is that this is being done intentionally. It's the major transnational corporations that are doing this. They're trying to brainwash us into believing that the world is a violent and dangerous place, that nobody believes in values or honesty or truth. The major protagonists in the television shows are people like, what's that, Born Bad or whatever that thing is.
Oh, Breaking Bad, the meth guy.
Breaking Bad, Breaking Bad, they have even Matthew McConaughey in True Detective, a complete nihilist, who believes that our planet, our universe is a big gutter in space, saying things like that. That this kind of constant barrage of propaganda, cage fighting on television, if you can believe that, putting two people men and women in a cage and having them punch each other senseless until one of them, is completely unconscious, or choke them to death. It's just, this has gone beyond the pale now.
Well, yeah, I mean,
we've all got to organize.
I've said that for many years now, that what we see happening is a lot of psychological type of actions that are happening on we the people when it comes to things on television. I mean, you see what happens where people, they will just kind of place their children or place themselves in front of a television set. Yes. They'll watch these violence shows and that kind of thing, but let them try to talk to their kids about sex, and it's a totally horrendous experience. We can't do that. And it brings a strange psychology to people that talking about things like love and hugging and communicating with each other and all this kind of stuff is something that's bad, but yet showing them that this whole violent environment is something that's good and to be, praised, it drives people into a weird psychological kind of a place.
Well, they're trying to train up people who are emotionally deadened.
Yes.
So that they can participate in invading Afghanistan and Iraq and Iran.
Right.
So they can get at their oil.
Right.
It's just the occupation of their oil fields. And now they're actually doing studies to show that women can now start participating in combat so that we can increase by 50% the number of soldiers that we can put around, 500 different military bases around the planet. I mean, it's time for people to come together and just say enough of this, that we're going to shut off the television sets, talk to our children, talk to each other, come together in, the old Grange meetings that they used to have, the Grange Hall, or, come together and talk about these things and take back control of our countries.
You're absolutely right.
Have to do.
One thing that I think I see happening with why people are, having so many problems when it comes to discussing things or to bring themselves up to a different level is that the system that we have currently in place, it basically forces people into thinking only in terms of this next week. Not how am I going to get through this next 10 years, but how am I even going to get through this next week? How am I going to feed my kids? I don't have the capability of paying my bills. I'm working 40 hours a week, but I'm still not able to even give a loaf of bread to my kids, and on and on. That brings people to a level of stress that they cannot then see past that next week. Whereas a lot of these power players that are out there, they actually think generationally. They think, what can we do now in the here and now to change things in the next generation?
Yeah, no, that I would just strongly recommend to everyone who's listening tonight to look up this Chautauqua movement thing that I'm talking about. It's CHAUTAQUE, Chautauqua. It's a Native American name that came out of northern New York with the big Six Indian Nations Confederacy up there. There's a big Lake Chautauqua up in New York, up by Buffalo, and that's where the Methodist Church had its summer camp, and that they invited people to come to the summer camp and spend the entire summer being trained to try to understand what the transnational corporate capitalists were doing and the robber barons that were doing, taking over our country. And they actually, as I said, generated out of that movement. They set up regional Chautauquas in the summertime, and by the year 1917, there were 2,500 Chautauquas all being held around the country. And they had people like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Clarence Darrow and Eugene Debs, and all these people would come and talk at these major conferences, would deliver major presentations, and people would sit in circles and talk about these things. They had people come and sing at these things and in dances. There were big social gatherings, and that's what is necessary again for us to start reclaiming our control over our own destiny. And that's why these issues that we're talking about here are so important for people. So just look up the Chautauqua movement and find out what that was all about, because we can spontaneously generate a new Chautauqua movement. And our Romero Institute here in California is going to be adopting this as one of our major projects to undertake over the next 5-year period, to try to generate a major discussion where people turn off their televisions. Howard Beale, remember that? Turn off your television. Go to the window and throw the window open and holler out, I'm mad as hell.
And I can't take any more. Exactly. Yep. I love some Howard Beale for sure. We had one question come in from the chat as well. They were wondering, in relation to the Vatican and the things that are going on in it right now, why do you think the Vatican owns so many telescopes around the world?
Well, because the Christology, the Catholic Christology, is rooted in a major set of assumptions about cosmos. Every major worldview there are four fundamental pillar questions that every human being asks herself or himself. And that is, how did the universe come into being? That's the major cosmological question. Secondly, is the universe unfolding in any meaningful direction? Is there some objective for the universe being created? Is it evolving in some teleological unfolding way towards some ultimate purpose or not? Thirdly, how did consciousness come into existence? This is what is called the ontological question in philosophy. How did human consciousness come into existence, or the consciousness of sentient beings, of animals and stuff, in a world of apparently inert matter? And then fourthly, what epistemological question is, what are the means that we have at our disposal as human beings by means of which we can answer cosmic questions like this? Are we restricted to our five senses of, seeing, taste, touch, feeling, hearing? Are these our only faculties by means of which we can gather data and process it through our intellect? And what is the role of the intellect? Do we have other faculties? Is there a sixth faculty? Is there a sixth sense that we have? And in one of the most important lectures I was ever at Harvard College, and Harvard University, at Harvard Law School, Harvard Divinity School that I went to, was on December 20th of 1967. The Crane Brinton, who had been the 35-year chairman of the Department of Intellectual History at Harvard University, was delivering his final lecture before he retired at the end of that fall semester. And he was asked to address the question of what the single most important intellectual insight was that he thought our human family had come to. And he got up in front of an entire assembled group of people at the Harvard University at the Lowell Hall and said he believes the greatest minds of our human family have all come to realize that our human family is right on the very brink of our next step in biological evolution. And that this next biological step was going to be we were going to differentiate ourselves from Homo sapiens to the same degree that Homo sapiens had distinguished ourselves from Homo erectus. Back at that period where we evolved basically from apes into human beings, and that this faculty that was going to be developing was a new faculty that was like seeing or hearing, in the same way that sight had been developed evolutionarily to be able to respond to the stimulus of light and take in the data that was revealed to us through light, and sound, and the development of our complex ear and hearing systems in response to the stimulus of sound, that there's a new faculty that is evolving that is going to be able to directly and experientially encounter the unifying phenomenon that bonds together every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire physical universe into one unified harmonious whole. And by means of this experience of the unity of all being, that we are going to be each capable of discerning what type of human conduct, individual and collective, is either harmonious with or disharmonious to the natural order of the universe. This is the fundamental cosmological worldview of Buddhism and of Islam, Sufism, and of Christianity. All of the major fundamental world religions are trying to tell us that there is a phenomenon happening in which human beings are evolving this new spiritual faculty, and that by dint of this faculty we can discern for ourselves what is right and what is wrong. And that is the fundamental source of democracy. That's what that's all about. The existence of fundamental human rights that belong to us each as individuals, to place absolute value on each and every human being, and for us to be able to participate in making judgments about what we're going to do collectively. The source of authority is this faculty that we have that is able to discern right and wrong. There was a point in time in which the royalists kept insisting that they were the only ones, an elite group of people, 1%, if you will, that were capable of discerning what was either harmonious with or disharmonious to the natural laws of the universe. and that they were in league with the ecclesial authorities, actually, of the Roman Catholic Church, when the nation-state of Rome, through Constantine in the 3rd century A.D., made the Roman Catholic Church the world religion, and that we've had to overcome that whole problem. And that's why it sounds ironic that somehow the Church in Pope Francis would play the major role in reestablishing the right of individuals to make judgments like this predicated upon the existence of this faculty. But that's what's going on here. And that's why they have so many telescopes. Because the probing deeper and deeper into the universe to really get to the bottom line of how the universe came into being and how it's unfolding and what the role of our human family is in the ever unfolding teleological development of our universe is what is the fundamental root source of normative values, of how it is that we fit into harmony in the universe. And that's why the Vatican has the observatory right there at Castel Gandolfo in Rome, and that's why the Jesuits run the major observatory, and they are the mystical doctors of mystical science of the Catholic Christian tradition. So that there's good news coming, and in Jesus, in Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, another Jesuit. Was the paleontologist who discovered Peking man. He's the one that was talking about Christ being a mutation, that he was one of the people like the avatars, like the Buddha and like others, the major Sufi mystics. These are people who have this faculty already fully evolved, and it brings with it a certain attendant, what they call siddhas, the ability to be in a state of consciousness where you can transcend the relationship between mass and energy, and you can actually transform matter. You can transform water into wine. You can levitate. You can walk on water. There are things that the Hindu fakers are known for doing. You can bury one of these guys in the ground and leave him there for a month, and then dig him up and he'll be up and walk away. That our human beings are capable of extraordinary things if we would stop, getting and spending and laying waste our power by chasing consumer goods and trying to satiate ourselves with, short-term stimulus. We've got to get out of this trap.
You're absolutely right with that. And one thing that I always point to when I talk to people about the things that Christ did and so on and so forth, and what we have in relation to that, I always point to the biblical verses that say, where he said, these things you will do and much more, so right. Everything that I can do, you can do. It just is a matter of faith and knowing that you can, moving from a place of believing that you can into knowing that you can. And that, that changes the way that the consciousness works.
That's right. Directed human intention. That's that we are masters of our own physical reality, and that we need to come to know this. That the experiments that have been done since between 1923 and 1926 with Max Planck and Schrodinger and the others, that they were able to determine that if you can subdivide any kind of material into smaller and smaller subcomponent elements to the point where you break down to the individual elements. And then you can break down the atomic structure into neutrons and protons and electrons. And then you can break down these smaller particles into muons and leptons. And you can eventually keep breaking them down until you generate what is an inchoate quantum field. It is not manifest in the material world anymore. It's a latent form of matter, and it can then spring up into full manifestation as a particle of mass, and it will then disappear. And then it will flash back into existence as a wave of energy, and then it'll disappear. And it does this in a completely random pattern. There's no pattern to it at all. But if, in fact, you direct human intention to an inchoate quantum field willing it to manifest itself as either a particle of mass or a wave of energy, it will do so to a statistically significant degree.
Absolutely.
Now, that is putting the lie to the Newtonian Cartesian worldview, believing that somehow there is this physical world outside of us that actually functions completely independent from our own intentions. This does not mean that we just each of us make up reality, that we can kind of get everything to just respond to us, or there's no reality except what we think. That's not what this says at all. What it's saying is that there is a new worldview that is in the offing right now in light of the discovery of quantum physics that are basically putting the lie to the restrictions that are imposed upon us by the Newtonian Cartesian worldview. And that is the fourth paradigm worldview, the scientific, logical, positivist, materialist worldview that is the engine of the capitalist system. And that we need to transcend that. We need to now move to a fifth paradigm worldview, which is the Platonic worldview, the classic liberal worldview. We need to move to the sixth paradigm worldview, which is the radical monist worldview of the ancient Stoics, the pre-Socratic Stoics. And we eventually move to a theological worldview of the seventh paradigm worldview of the spiritual avatars, who understand that everything is made up of spirit and everything is made up of consciousness, in fact. That even the inchoate quantum field, the reason it responds to human consciousness is because it is consciousness.
Yes.
And that's the whole physical universe is a condensed form of consciousness that abides in the outside of the sum total of mass and energy, the condensed form of consciousness that constitutes the universe. There is an infinite and eternal field of completely undifferentiated consciousness.
You're absolutely right.
This is the one being that is not a noun. There's no noun quality to this. This is a verb of being, a non-transitive verb of being, and that's what resides at the center of our consciousness. And so that we can commune with and dissolve back into this state of unified consciousness. And from that perspective, we can perceive what is harmonious or disharmonious to the natural order of the universe. That's what this faculty is.
Well, I've always looked at things as opposite of what science generally tends to look at. They look at the worldview as matter is what is existent, and out of that matter comes the mind, and out of the mind comes the consciousness. And to me, it's the opposite viewpoint. The consciousness is everything. Out of that consciousness comes the mind, or this body, this meat suit that we're wearing, and out of that comes the matter. So I kind of have the opposite viewpoint of what science generally does, and I think it kind of follows what you're saying right here as well.
That's right. No, that's exactly right. And so, this is what we need to direct our attention to. We need to have a new movement in our country and in Western civilization to be able to come to grips with, jettisoning all of these old, reactionary, fundamentalist, materialist views of Christianity and Sufism, Islamic Sufism and Buddhism and Hinduism. What we need to do is we need to come to grips with what the radical spiritual truth is to all of this, and the advantage is that this guy Francis knows what he's talking about. I mean, he knows what he's talking about, and he's a gifted, sweet, caring, compassionate guy. And it doesn't mean everybody has to run out and become Catholics. But what it does mean is we have to come to grips with the moral implications of what's going on in the world. And this global climate change has a very important, moral element. This is potentially devastating to the poor people of the world. They're going to be suffering these consequences.
Yep, exactly. Well, listen, Daniel, we're going to go ahead and take a break here real quick.
Status of a potential hero, into an anti-hero. It's just that he got into this position, and found himself surrounded by his national security advisors, and started, getting him drawn into more and more this thing of using the drones to murder people. I mean, this idea of being able to murder people with a drone, an assassination program, I mean, there was a point in time when we thought that if we could expose the fact that Richard Nixon was, authorizing assassinations, we could get him removed from office. But now they're doing it kind of openly, and they're just using a different technology than shooting someone with a high-powered rifle. But they're authorized to kill Americans. This whole National Defense Authorization Act, Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act, 2012. I mean, he signed that into law. He didn't have to do that. He could very clearly have vetoed that bill and said, you take that provision out of this bill, or I'm not going to authorize the military spending. But he didn't. And he's basically compromised all of his basic understanding of the Constitution. I've never gotten the impression that he understood the metaphysical and natural law underpinnings of the entire Constitution, that entire Madisonian understanding, that people are aware of the fact that of the original founders of the United States Constitution. The fact is that 37 of the original federal judges, 10 of the original cabinet members, 3 United States Supreme Court justices, 12 members of the Continental Congress, 21 United States senators, and 39 of the original United States congressmen were, including President James Madison and Aaron Burr, were all students of one particular professor, John Witherspoon, who was a professor of moral theology at the College of New Jersey, which later became Princeton University in New Jersey. That they were all students of his, and he taught about natural law. The entire understanding of the relationship of our human species to the natural law, natural order of the universe. This is a profoundly important insight into the common law or the natural law theory that underlies the Constitution. When they say things like, men are created equal, they're endowed by their Creator with these inalienable rights, and the question arises, well, how do you identify what these inalienable rights are? What kind of worldview is it that postulates the existence of these fundamental rights? It's the natural law worldview. In that, I don't think Obama ever became clear about that worldview. I don't think that Larry Tribe understands it. Larry was our constitutional law professor, both Obama's and mine, and many other people. That I was in Larry Tribe's original constitutional law class back in 1967 and 68. That he thinks that you just have to read the opinions and try to figure out what the judges are saying and what their rational line of analysis is, and you project that rational line out and then determine what is consistent with that line of reasoning or not. That's all scientific logical positivism. That's not understanding the metaphysical underpinnings of the absolute value of an individual human being because of them being a seat of consciousness. So that I think that one, it could be even more tragic if he had known that at one time and strayed from it and fallen prey to the dark side of the forces. But I don't think Obama ever did really understand it. He's incredibly pragmatic and unphilosophical about his approach to things. He's a brilliant guy and very attractive and smart and everything else. But when I met him the first time, I was running a quarter of the state for John Edwards in the Democratic presidential campaign, the primary campaign back in 2004 in Iowa, and I was assigned to go and meet with Obama to try to talk Obama out of his support for private nuclear power. And when I said that, I met him off stage in Iowa, in Fairfield, Iowa, and I was asking him to try to revise his position on private nuclear power. And he said, "Look, Dan, let me tell you this, that I will give you my personal assurance that I will not authorize the construction of one new nuclear power plant unless I am personally convinced that it can be run completely safely, and the nuclear waste materials that are generated by it can be eliminated completely safely. And I said to him, I said, well, neither one of those things is going to happen during any 8 years of a presidency. And he said, he looked around at everybody, he said, well, then neither you nor I have anything to worry about, right? And I said to him, I said, oh, that was very good. I said, but that doesn't answer the question as to what percentage of the alternative energy budget you're planning on squandering on attempting to build a safe nuclear power plant or to eliminate the waste materials. And I said, it doesn't answer what percentage you're planning to squander on that. And he looked at me and he said, what percentage do you have in mind? And I said, none. I don't have any percentage in mind of squandering that money. He said, well, call me when you do. So that he just thinks that you can just, sit down at the table and give a little bit of anything to everybody at the table, and you can all sort of get to a position of yes. And so he's got no real standards of ethics in that whole process. And that's what we see happening to him now. He got up into the presidency, and he was confronted by a whole set of radical reactionaries, and he kept thinking that you could just give ground to these people and make concessions to them and give in and give in and give in and give in. And eventually you'll get to a place of a proper compromise, but they wouldn't compromise with him. And so what they did is they just put him up against the wall. And so he ended up, authorizing the National Defense Authorization Act, authorizing the United States military to come in and arrest citizens for no probable cause. And then he says a signing statement saying, well, I want to make it clear that I won't use this power as long as I'm president. So what the hell did you sign it for? Why would you give somebody else authority to do something like that? Why don't you veto that? And so that's he obviously trusts himself to decide who's going to be assassinated with a drone, and just shoot their eyes out from 10,000 feet up, and just murder them in the middle of the day somewhere. But that's not appropriate. It's not legitimate. And he refuses to come to grips ultimately with the fact that this entire war, the entire invasion of the Middle Eastern oil fields and the occupation of the Middle Eastern oil fields was all undertaken by George H.W. Bush and his son, W. Bush, who are major oil men, that own major stock in the oil companies. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand what's going on there, but Obama proved unable to extract himself from all of that. It's like the gorilla who stuck their hand through the hole in the box and is holding onto the banana in the box, and he can't get his hand out of the box unless he lets go of the banana. That they've just determined that they're going to hold on to the Middle Eastern oil fields and keep China from getting access to any of the oil in those oil fields to try to stave off the ever increasing likelihood that China is going to become the dominant superpower on the planet, within the next 25 years. And they're just holding on to the oil fields to keep them from getting access to oil. That's what's going on here. And Obama didn't have the courage to take this position and say so. And now, he spent his entire first term refusing to come to grips with it, trying to negotiate in a pragmatic way with everybody. He gets into his second term, and he's trying to get Obamacare to be, an alternative to the single-payer health system that every other, advanced country in the world has, of sharing tax funds to help provide health care for everybody. He won't do that. He sets up a thing that is a sop to the major insurance companies that give the triple the number of clients they have, and then uses tax money to support it. He's lost his way. He's going to, and you might assume that in his last 2 years in office, he could make some fundamental moral decisions to change things. But now he's not going to do this because the Democratic Party wants him to pave the way for Hillary Clinton to come into office.
We see that with the TPP.
He's got to establish a continuity now to allow her to become the first woman president, so we can all cheer that back to back we've had the first black president and the first woman president, back to back. But they're pursuing policies that they're downright conservative to reactionary foreign policy positions. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't do some good things, that Obama has said and done some things with regard to Native American issues. I'm confident that Hillary is going to do some things they're helpful for us here at the Romero Institute. We have our Lakota People's Law Project, where we're dealing with the fact that the state of South Dakota has been taking 742 kids a year away from their families and putting them in all white foster care centers, and dosing them with pharmaceuticals. We're working like mad to get that stopped, and we're going to take the kids back into custody and take $65 million a year away from the state of South Dakota from federal funds and give it to the tribes to set up their own child and family services. We're succeeding in doing that. Obama is supportive of us doing that. Hillary's going to be supportive of that. But that doesn't excuse that they're killing people around the world with drones, or supporting the military invasion of the Middle Eastern oil fields, to placate the major industrialists. So that I'm sorely disappointed in him. I didn't vote for him anyhow. I mean, I voted for Mario Cuomo. Just say, that I wanted him to be president. He's the president of the Teilhard de Chardin Society, and it's a very, very intelligent and devoted guy. He was, so that's who I voted for. But I knew Obama from talking with him face to face, and I knew that he was just a profound pragmatist and didn't seem to have a basic moral compass. And I certainly don't think that Hillary does. I do think that obviously that Bernie Sanders is taking all of the appropriate positions. I mean, he gets a full 100 as a grade for all the particular public policy positions he's taking. My younger son Dagan said to me the other day, "Well, then why aren't you out working for him?" Because I know perfectly well if Bernie Sanders won the presidency, the first day he went into the Oval Office, he picked up the telephone, they would have cut off his phone line. And he'd call his secretary and she'd be gone. All of the major industrialists and military institutions would just refuse to cooperate with him. And so in that sense, Obama, being a pragmatist, understands that you have to deal with the instrumentalities of the United States government that have been put into place by the transnational corporate capitalists. And that may well explain to a substantial degree the kind of compromises that he has made. But, that one has a moral obligation to do the right thing, when one gets into an office like that. And I'm confident that Hillary Clinton at one time, when she graduated from Wellesley, was a very progressive person. She and Bill both, in his first term as the governor of Arkansas, they were very progressive, but basically the forces of reaction mobilized against them, and he lost the election for re-election. So they made the pragmatic decision to move way to the center and play centrist politics. The new, more moderate Democratic Party of, Richard Gebhardt in the Democratic Leadership Council. That's what she's the chair. She was the chairperson of the policy committee of the Democratic Leadership Council, so that we know where she's going to go on her positions. But it's not because she doesn't have, at least intrinsically liberal instincts, but she just doesn't think it's realistic that she can do anything. So I think that people have to mobilize and do everything they can to support Bernie Sanders, to push the Democratic Party, back from the right of center to the center and to the left of center, to actually take liberal positions, not only domestically but internationally in their foreign policy. So I'm hoping that something radical like is happening in the Catholic Church right now with Francis can happen within the Democratic Party, but I wouldn't bet on it. So I do think that there needs to be a new independent political party organized based upon a new paradigm, the new post-quantum paradigm of understanding the relationship of our human species and our consciousness to the material realm, preparing for contact with an extraterrestrial civilization, and bringing the church and the United States government and the United Nations and their other entities up into the 21st century, which is a longer reach than they seem to think they're capable of doing right now. But we as the people can force that to happen. And so that's what I think we should do. And if people would want to contact us here at the Romero Institute, it's just simple RomeroInstitute.com. There's a face page and there's a website. We have a blog that goes on all the time, and they can follow the projects. We have 5 major projects going on. I'd mentioned the Lakota People's Law Office to recover some 4,000 Lakota children that are out in the world in the hands of white foster care parents, to bring them back into their tribe and their people. That's one major project. The other project is I mentioned the Constitutional Protection Zone, to establish that here in Santa Cruz, and then in Santa Cruz County, and then in other counties in California, to eventually have California be a sanctuary area so that due process will be guaranteed to anyone here in the state of California. We have the major global climate change project going on that is in support of what Francis has called for in his papal encyclical on care of our common earth, our common home. You know, we've got a 4th project. I'm doing a 2nd book. I've got a major book out already. It's called The People's Advocate. People can get that by contacting us here at the Romero Institute. It's available through Amazon. It's in most of the major bookstores. It's called The People's Advocate. I'm writing the 2nd book of the trilogy now, called Rulers of the Realm, exposing this entire elite 1% and how they have captured control over the American governmental institutions. And then I'll be doing a 3rd book that is called The Dream Fulfilled, talking about how we have to mobilize this Chautauqua movement and establish a new political party and bring about the kind of fundamental, profound change, the spiritual change, fundamentally, in our country and in our world. So, and then I teach constitutional law at the University of California here at Santa Cruz. So we do all those things, but I can tell you, if I could think of anything more interesting to do, I'd be doing that. But this is extremely interesting, and I will eventually get these things done and be able to spend my full time working on the issue of extraterrestrial intelligence and UFOs, because I think that is ultimately the cutting edge of facilitating our people to have these profound philosophical and theological questions that we need to get answered in order to start to prepare to encounter these other beings from the other civilizations, so that we can explain ourselves in an adequate way to them.
In your experience, with information that you've run across and the different people that you've encountered and spoken to over the years, do you get the idea or the impression that maybe the extraterrestrials that are out there that have had kind of interactions here with us, that they are waiting for us to make these kind of changes before they actually make a widespread appearance? Or is there something like that with it?
True. Absolutely true. You know, they now, right now, they know that as of right now, our culture is a very dangerous culture. You know, that we're fully armed, and we have nuclear weapons, and they're trying to develop, you know, further to figure out how to weaponize the technology that we've recovered in the downed UFO crafts. You know, this is a very dangerous species that we have here. You know, that we've got to reach this next stage of biological evolution to develop from Homo sapien to Homo divinus. You know, that we've got to get up into our divine nature in order to be safe to deal with. So, you know, they've been probing and contacting us and meeting individuals and monitoring what we've been doing. I'm sure of that. But it's too dangerous. There would be such an intense reaction on the part of the militarists to view them as the enemy. You know, they'd have to try to figure out how to engage in some sort of military confrontation with them as the ultimate other. You know, it's the absolute dream for every kind of militant type to identify them. That's what they're doing in the propaganda on the television.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the movies, that they're all coming here to eat us somehow. That they're trying. Like, man, we have to overcome that. We need to get out in front of this. It's one of the major missions that we have here at the Romero Institute, is to get out in front of that type of propaganda, to be able to prepare our human family for a friendly, positive, constructive, mutually beneficial engagement with the extraterrestrial civilization. That's our calling in this generation. That's going to be our ultimate contribution to the human family, is to be able to develop this new paradigm and develop this new worldview that is going to be able to elevate all of our institutions, nationally and internationally, to prepare for this type of a wonderful encounter with the extraterrestrial civilization. That's my firm belief.
I'm not in disagreement at all. I think that any race that's out there is going to look at us with some very deep questions as to whether or not they'd even survive or would want to take the chance to try to deal with this race that we have here. People are crazy. That's really what it comes down to. People are just crazy. And you have individuals that are fine, but overall, the masses of humanity, I think, are just not ready for it. I really do. Yeah. It's unfortunate, but that's the way I look at it. We just haven't evolved to that point yet. So what we have to do is we have to listen to all of the avatars and the basic prophets to tell us how it is that we can facilitate the accelerated evolution of this new faculty that we have, through meditation, through particular dietary practices, through particular forms of abstaining from certain types of activities that diminish all of our energy. The eating of flesh, the killing of animals and eating their flesh, this type of thing. We need to try to evolve up away from this to be able to move to accelerate this evolutionary process. That's what the good news is the message that's been being communicated to us by the prophets down for the last 5,000 years, which is a comparatively short period of time in the history of the planet. But it's in the last 5,000 years, this open secret has been being communicated to us by the prophets, that this is happening. That the good news is that this is evolving teleologically in our human family, and that we're able to accelerate this if we turn and focus our attention consciously on doing so. That's what the good news is. What Jesus said is, it's not so important what it is that I say, it's what I am. It's what I am. Look and see what I am, and you will do greater things than I. That's the good news, and that's the good news that Francis is bringing. It's the good news that the Dalai Lama is bringing. It's the good news that all of the major mystical beings are communicating to us, and it's the same kind of message that the ETs are aware of, that they're waiting to hear become a dominant theme in our human family, so that they can open up to us and invite us in to become part of the galactic community. Very, very interesting. I really like your takes on the subject, to be honest with you. It falls right in line with a lot of different thoughts that I've had over the years as well. I have one other question in relation to this, as well as getting into something that you spoke about earlier when you were discussing the Cold War and the issues that were going on between the United States and the Soviet Union, that they were kind of like the ultimate other at that point in time. How much of that do you think was actually a distraction, and how much do you see of happening in the world right now being a distraction so that people are being kept away from thinking of these higher things?
Well, what I think is that there's an entire octave of worldviews that are shared in our human family. I think personally that they're related to the chakra energy centers in our body. That we have these people have heard of normally these 7 chakras. Your root chakra and they go up through our system. But there's the great adepts talk about 8 major chakras, because there is this additional chakra. If you hold your hand up straight up in the air and make a fist above your head, there's an 8th chakra that rests at the at the top of the energy fields, the envelopes that are generated around our body, an individual envelope for each one of the chakras. And that I believe that if one is out of balance in any one of our 8 chakras, it comes to be a dominant energy in your system. It's not balanced. So therefore you become dominated by your will to survive, your desire to assert power over others, and believe that you're caught in a dialectic. I've delivered a number of presentation seminars on this particular issue of the octave of worldviews, and I've done it. I teach it up at the university. When any class that I teach, I say, try to understand that there's this octave of worldviews, and that they're related to being either in or out of harmony in these different chakra systems in the body, so that the people who are out of balance in the second chakra get locked into this dialectic, that they believe that they derive their sense of self-value from being in dialectical confrontation with some ultimate other. They do it in entire good faith because that is their experience. That's how they experience the universe. It's not like many of us that we stand out on a wonderful summer night like this, and we look up into the stars, and we have this kind of wonderful, awestruck feeling of kind of great gratitude for being alive and this wonder. Other people, however, have this experience of fear and alienation, a sense of abandonment by the universe, that they can't feel any kind of unitive experience. And because of that, they think that the only way they can derive any kind of relative value is by vanquishing some ultimate other, and that they derive their entire sense of achievement and value out of the degree to which they're successful in vanquishing some ultimate other. So that's their experience. They're very strong-willed, very powerful, and they resort to the use of violence to vanquish the other. And you can see it, the propaganda going on everywhere about this. I mean, just look at tonight. Tonight is the all-star baseball game, and they actually take people from both leagues, and they put the American League against the National League. We just come through the whole National Basketball Championship, where they put, the Golden State Warriors, against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Or they play the Los Angeles Lakers against the Boston Celtics, and they put them in different colored uniforms, and they chase a ball up and down the floor to try to put it through a hoop. But the fundamental propaganda at play there is the dialectic of good guys versus bad guys. The team you're cheering for against the other team, and they do it in baseball, and they do it in football. And they do it on the television shows. And here's the good guy cops chasing the bad guys. And they constantly tell you that the only way that the good guys can win is by killing the other people. That ultimately the white hat guy chases down the black hat guy and jumps from his horse onto the other guy and then beats him up and beats him senseless, or kills him, to be even better. And that's how they win. Now it's a very powerful paradigm. To the extent to which they arm themselves and are willing to resort to the use of violence against others to establish their dominion, they present a significant problem. But we have to be careful not to fall prey to the same dynamic that they're engaged in, so that we project them as the ultimate other. That somehow they're the bad guys and we're the good guys, because if you fall prey to adopting that dialectic, you're in their worldview. And they will beat you at that worldview. A dialectical contest always goes to the true believer. And that, so we don't want to get caught in that. You need to step back and see the entire 8 worldviews, the entire spectrum of worldviews. And just like with lasers, if you take if you take the primary colors of the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, you take these primary colors of our spectrum that we're able to see as human beings, that we're able to, our sight has been able to subdivide the light rays into those basic primary colors. If you take a laser the laser beams that project those pure colors, and you project each of them, the 7 of them, onto a single point, they will set up an interference pattern with each other that generates white light. But every single one of the primary colors has to be pure, and it has to be there, or else we will not be able to generate white light. So in the same thing is that we have the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That there's a genuine harmonic that we're able to hear. That the faculty of sound in our human family is able to discern these pure notes and to be able to see these pure colors in the spectrum. In the same way, we have these basic biologically grounded chakra energy vibrational systems in our body that only if you have them in perfect balance can you really evolve, can you really open up the 8th chakra, that chakra above the head. And I believe that if we can get all of our 7 basic chakras in harmony and open up that 8th chakra, we're probably going to discover that the 8th chakra of our human species is basically the root chakra of the next octave of being. So there's an entire vibrational dimension of other beings that is in a higher frequency than we are. That's all. And so that we need to be able to see the world and the universe in this way. And so that we're not enemies with each other, that we're all part of a harmonious system, and that we're all in relationship to each other, and we all bring something very positive to the table. That's what I believe.
That's amazing. I like your explanation for all of that. One thing that I have in mind is as like the ultimate experience, what you were referring to earlier with the stars, is going outside and looking at a star and realizing that the photons that just entered into your body are now a part of you, and literally a part of that star has now become a part of you. That star may have died, millions of years ago, but it gave its energy of itself to interact with you in that moment in time. And it's a pretty amazing kind of profound experience to have, I think.
Yeah. And as they say, is that our physical body is made up of stardust.
Exactly.
That is at one time that resided at the heart of a star.
Every atom within
the universe. And we're made up of stardust.
Every atom.
And that organic relationship that we have, if we can remain in that state of consciousness, then we can, in fact, radiate that type of affection, compassion, in harmonious interrelationship with all other beings, and it has a definite effect upon other beings. When they're exposed to that type of a vibrational frequency, there's a harmonic that gets set up, an actual sympathetic resonance that is set up that draws other beings up into their higher frequencies, and that's what happens with avatars. That's what happens with mystics and prophets. That people they get in their energy field, and their whole spiritual consciousness is elevated, and that's the mission that we all have, to try to work on ourselves, to get ourselves into those higher states of consciousness, and to facilitate other people getting into those states. At the same time, we have the practical responsibilities for going about figuring out how to collectively work together to address the kind of day-to-day common problems that we have in any community as to how to take care of ourselves.
Exactly. Well, we've got just a few minutes left here. I'd like to give you the chance to get out any kind of website information. I know you were speaking about the one website. I know you have DanielSheehan.com as well, correct?
Oh, yes. It's a DanielPSheehan.org or .com, I guess it is, DanielPSheehan.com. It's got a lot of my classes there. But if you go to the Romero Institute, RomeroInstitute.com, they actually have videos of the classes that I have taught. A constitutional law class. I have a class on the 8 alternative theories of the Kennedy assassination. I have a major class on constitutional law. There's lots of different lectures that I've given, and they're all there for free. So just go to the RomeroInstitute.org, and there's a face page for the Romero Institute. Then you can look up you click on to our Lakota project. You can find all about what we're doing up in South Dakota with the Lakota people. You can find out all about our Constitutional Protection Zone project. You can find out all about the major books that I've written, etc. They're all there on the RomeroInstitute.org.
Sounds great. Daniel, thank you so much for being here tonight. I appreciate you putting up with me as opposed to Michael Vara.
No, I'm kidding. I enjoyed it. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad that all the folks. And you can sign up on the website. They have petitions that you can sign to ask Francis to revoke the doctrine of discovery. You can sign up on the website to support a Constitutional Protection Zone. You can sign up and become members of the Romero Institute to be kept up daily. We have interns here putting out blogs all day long about the issues of the time. So we've got lots of services here for people.
Sounds awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Daniel. I definitely appreciate it.
Terrific, Ira. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Good night, everybody. MUFON and others because of my Harvard Law degree and the fact that I'd represented the New York Times, for example, in the Pentagon Papers case, had actually initiated the case in front of the United States Supreme Court that established the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources. I was chief counsel in the Karen Silkwood case that won the $10.5 million judgment for Karen Silkwood, the woman that was killed at the nuclear facility in Oklahoma. That was portrayed by Meryl Streep in the Academy Award-nominated movie Silkwood. I was also chief counsel in the Iran-Contra case that filed a major federal civil complaint against the off-the-shelf enterprise of Oliver North and the Reagan-Bush administration, and was also legal counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union at the Wounded Knee occupation back in 1973. So there's a whole range of things that I've done that have caused people to believe that my analysis and investigation of a lot of the issues relating to extraterrestrial intelligence and some of the attendant issues like UFOs, etc., is worthy of some listening to.
Well, you definitely come with a big pedigree, that's for sure. A big pedigree and a big background. That's a heck of a litany of different things that you've been involved with.
Yes. Well, I've been fortunate. I've been because of my interest in these issues of the interface between public policy, very important public policy questions, and the law. It's been kind of a special practice that I've developed over the years. You know, I don't do divorce cases, and I don't do child custody cases. I don't do things like that, or car accidents. I do cases that involve major public policy issues and the constitutional issues that are raised. For example, in the attempt to suppress the information of military officers and U.S. government employees and others who obtain information about issues relating to extraterrestrial intelligence and then are threatened with having their pensions revoked if they reveal this publicly, etc. So I've been asked by a number of people to represent them if in fact they go public with their information and they're later retaliated against and the threats are carried out against them to revoke their pensions or something. So it's been helpful to have the kind of experience and legal authority that I have to represent people in court. So that's contributed to my being able to have the privilege of being involved in vetting the witnesses. For example, that the 21 witnesses that appeared at the Disclosure Project back in 2001, and more recently in front of the former members of Congress in Washington a couple of years ago.
You mentioned that you were involved with the case that made it so that it's possible for journalists to protect their
Yes.
witnesses. I think that's a big
Okay.
one. I'm very much an advocate for exactly that kind of thing being allowed. You know, I'm
Hmm.
a huge that's a huge case, to say the least, and a big
Yeah,
precedent that was set.
that was, yeah.
In regards to that, I guess what do you think of the things that are happening lately, where it seems like whistleblowers and witnesses and that type of thing are being targeted by the government entities?
Well, sure. No, that's what they do. You know, it's an old CIA agent once told me a famous story that they tell in the agency of this little Russian woman that lived way out on the steppes, and in the depths of winter, it was like 20 degrees below zero, and she went out of her. So with the onset of this new information coming to the people, the Catholic Church and the Jesuit order have stepped forward and convened a major press conference in Rome at the Vatican back in October of 2009, and specifically stated that they believe, based on the developing science, that it's very likely in the comparatively near future, sooner than later, we're going to encounter life in outer space, and they're going to find it on other planets, and that I believe that they're going to be using this set of discoveries to feather into our culture. The discovery of microscopic life on other planets. Then they're going to discover kind of basic single cell life, and then they're going to find multiple cell life, and then they're going to find simple life forms of bacteria and plants, and they're going to eventually discover, a complex, highly intelligent, and highly technologically developed civilization of sentient, intelligent beings that are specifically not human. And Father Fuentes and the others back in October of 2009 called on the laity of the world to start having important discussions about what the profound philosophical and theological implications are going to be of our human species discovering that we're not, in fact, not only not the center of the physical universe, as it was one time maintained, which gave us our sense of great self-importance, but when that was proven to be not true, there was a traumatic experience that our human family went through of trying to recalibrate how it is that we could possibly, still be the most important beings in the universe. And so what we did is we replaced this theory of concentric circles with us at the center of the whole universe with a pyramid, placing ourselves at the top of the pyramid of a biological evolution. And now, even that is likely to be challenged. We're very likely to find that, given the fact that there are 500 billion star systems in our galaxy with some 40 billion planets that may well hold life, and in addition to the 500 billion star systems there are in our galaxy, there are now estimated to be 500 billion trillion galaxies. So it's not likely that we're alone.
Absolutely. Well,
in the universe.
we know from for example, Hubble. One of the most dramatic images I've ever seen is the image where Hubble they pointed it to a blank spot in the sky, this little itty bitty 1% piece of the sky, and just left it on. And they thought that it was just a dead area of space, that there was nothing that was there. But by the time the images came back and they were able to develop everything, they saw that there were hundreds and hundreds of fully formed galaxies there, just waiting to be examined. It's amazing to me.
People can look this other section of the Hubble big movie that they released on that is that you look at the Orion's belt, the one that's fairly easy to pick out with that series of stars forming the belt, and there's the so-called sword hanging down. If you look at the star at the very, very bottom tip of the sword of Orion's belt, they focused on that, and they were able to basically, through computerization, pull down the minimal amounts of light and focus it through Hubble. And there's this scene in Hubble in the big IMAX movie where they are able to kind of take us up into outer space and look over the edge down into this. It turns out to be a major cauldron of producing house to try to get some wood that had been cut outside, and she found the snake that was frozen solid out there by the wood pile, and she brought the snake in and put it down in front of the fireplace, and as the heat built up and the little snake thawed out, she reached down and stroked the snake, and the snake bit her in the hand, and she was freaked out, and she looked at the snake and she said, "Oh, that was terrible. I brought you in here from the cold, you were freezing, and I put you in front of the fire, and and here you just reach out and bite me." And the snake looked up at her and said, "Well, gee, lady, that's what snakes do."
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I've heard
the thing is, well, the thing is that that you put people in charge of a set of secret programs. Starting with the National Security Act of 1947, you create the Central Intelligence Agency and the National Security Council, and you put in front of them this assertion that the Soviet Union is attempting to take over the whole world, and we have to stop them because basically, as George Carlin says, that's our job. So they end up in this dialectical confrontation with Russia, and they constantly rationalize, deep secrets and covert operations and political assassinations and other things. And so they become very aggressive in attempting to conceal that type of activity, not so much from the Soviet Union or other potential adversaries, because they all know we're doing this, but they're trying to keep it concealed from the American people, because they're trying to convince the American people that we're engaged constantly in defending democracy and trying to promote human rights around the world, whereas in fact it's quite clear that that's not what we're engaged in. And that goes a great distance in explaining why it is that when in July of 1947, when the vehicles crashed at Roswell, when the United States military took those UFOs into possession and insisted upon trying to figure out what the technology was, when they're faced with such an extraordinary event of that kind, there's the old Sufi saying that when a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are his pockets. And in this particular instance, they actually encounter extraterrestrial life forms and vehicles, and all they can think of is trying to seize the technology and figure out how to make weapons out of it, and how we can secure some sort of a competitive advantage over the Soviet Union, whom they branded as the ultimate other. And so that they keep this secret all the way from 1947 all the way up to 1992, basically December 31st of 1991, when the Soviet Union dissolves. But by that time, they built up such a momentum of deception and lies and deceit that they can't quite figure out how to get their way out of this thing now. And so that's the situation they find themselves in. So they've developed this entire tactic of suppressing news media people who investigate things that they're doing, are trying to attack people who are whistleblowers, anybody who threatens the kind of veil of secrecy that the national security state has arisen behind, and so that they go after fellows like Snowden and others who are whistleblowers. But we represented the New York Times back in 1971 when we were put into possession of all 47 volumes of the highly classified Pentagon Papers case that the Neil Sheehan, one of our investigative reporters, got from Dan Ellsberg. But we protected him all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, and ended up winning that case. And so we're able to fend off some of these aggressive positions that are taken by the executive branch. But as the founders of the Constitution Hello, this is Dan.
Hi, Daniel. This is Ira Robinson, and I'm with Late Night in the Midlands. Michael Vara
Wow.
Michael Vara had to take tonight off. He's got some really major storm activity going on in his area tonight. So unfortunately,
Okay, all right.
he couldn't do it. So he asked me to stand in for him tonight.
Okay, all right.
I was a little concerned. We tried to get a hold of you.
Do you want to move it to a different day or something?
Oh, no. We're live right now, and we're good to go. So. Yep. Actually, I read a little brief bio for you off for the listeners, and we can go ahead and get started if you're ready for it.
Sure. Great. What's your name now?
My name is Ira.
Ira. Good. Great, Ira. Good. I'm right here. Let's do
Okay.
it.
Awesome. Sounds great. Okay. So, like I said, I kind of gave a little bio for you, but if you don't mind, maybe give the listeners a good background info on you so that they know where you're coming from.
Sure, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, go for it. We're live.
Good, right. Terrific. Okay, yeah. Well, my name is Dan Sheehan. I served for 10 years in Washington D.C. as the General Counsel for the United States Jesuit headquarters, and was co-director of the National Social Ministry Office for the United States Jesuits, which is the policy formulation group. And as you know, the first Jesuit in history ever to be chosen to be Pope is in fact Pope Francis, who right now is shaking up the world in considerable degree with his comments about global climate change and the direct role that the economic system of transnational corporate capitalism plays in the contributing to the global climate change. And I was the co-founder of the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review when I was at Harvard Law School. I was a 1970 graduate of Harvard Law School, 67 graduate of Harvard College. Went on to do 2 years of my master's work at Harvard Divinity School in comparative social ethics, and began my PhD degree in social ethics when I was asked to become chief counsel for the Jesuit headquarters. And it was there that I ended up being invited to be special counsel to the Congressional Research Service study that was done at the request of President Jimmy Carter when he was elected in November of 1976. To prepare a major report for President Carter on the probabilities of the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence, and giving an account of the phenomenon of extraterrestrial vehicles, the UFOs that people had said they had seen. So it was in that context that I first started having my connection in 1977 with this particular issue. And I was later asked by Dr. John Mack, who was the chairman of the Department of Clinical Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, to represent him in front of the Harvard faculty committee that he was called in front of when he wrote his book in 1994 called Abductions, Human Contact with Aliens. And so I've been general counsel to the Disclosure Project that Dr. Stephen Greer sponsored back in 2001. I was general counsel to the Citizens Commission conference that we had a year ago in Washington, D.C. And so I've been involved in making presentations to the International Congress, UFO Congress, and said when they told me you have to be eternally vigilant because the executive branch views themselves as being basically the progeny of the king. And so they all think that they have the right to engage in all types of activities that exonerate them from having to obey the rest of the laws that everybody obeys. And sometimes it breaks out into the public, as it did with the Nixon administration. You know, back in 1972, the Watergate burglary. I happened to have been fortunate. I was one of the three trial lawyers in F. Lee Bailey's office when our office represented James McCord, the Watergate burglar, who was the longtime CIA wiretapping specialist. And He's the guy that ended up blowing the whistle on Richard Nixon and revealing the plumbers unit and Nixon's deep involvement in the Watergate thing that led to his impeachment. So I've been around these things for a long time, and I think that one of the most important issues that is being concealed by the national security state, and which they protect by retaliating against news media people or anybody who has access to this information, is this issue of the existence of an extraterrestrial civilization and the UFO sightings that now literally thousands of people have seen, and many of whom have been openly attacked by United States military personnel, intelligence community people trying to destroy their credibility. We've now obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, internal memos that have been prepared in the Air Force and the other Pentagon offices, explicitly advocating that secret attacks be directed against anyone who attempts to reveal to the public the existence of these UFOs and what their connection is to an extraterrestrial civilization. But, that we just keep after this thing and working at it and trying to get various institutions to change their positions on this. And we have succeeded now, finally, in getting the Jesuit order. A lot of the guys that are in the largest single order of the Catholic Church, which is the largest denomination in the world, to move forward now. And we've gotten, Father Fuentes, Jose Fuentes, who is the Jesuit priest, who is the director of the Vatican Observatory, is the fellow who, and the head of the Peace and Justice group. These are people who have brought together world scientists at Castel Gandolfo back in 2009, October 2009, and brought in a whole series of some 30-plus world scientists to have discussions with the hierarchy of the Catholic Church about the growing evidence that is obviously coming to the fore, that is now revealing that for the first time they are certain now that there are other planets around other stars. We now know that with the Kepler, a telescope that's been now put up after the Hubble, that is much more powerful than Hubble, is able now to expand knowledge that rather than simple 100 billion star systems that they at one time thought were in our Milky Way, they now have increased that to 400 billion star systems, and now they're likely to expand it more to 500 billion star systems in just our Milky Way galaxy.
And there's multitudes.
They figure 20% of them have multiple planet systems around them, and of those, a full quarter of those have planets in the so-called Goldilocks realm, not too far from the sun and not too close to the sun to have adequate heat for liquid water. So that they've now estimated there are probably some 40 billion planets just in our galaxy, of the Milky Way galaxy, that may possibly sustain life.